I have a couple slides. I hope. I am the bad haircut, ill-fitting suit dude. Still glad to be here. In 4 minutes, I'm just going to cover a framework that we in VA think of this stuff and try to put some of the studies that you heard about today in that context. Take it or leave it. But knowledge generation with EHR data is sort of what this is about, and there's several different layers there. Population level to inform policy, but then there's patient level. What do you do with the patient sitting in front of you? And then a lot we heard about the ability to randomize patient, and we do it all using big data. I really don't know what that means. I have no idea why I'm showing this slide, except I'm a really big fan of Pulp Fiction. In terms of the tools that we have, at least that we're using in VA to try to get into this game, and we've been doing it for about 5 years, infrastructure tools like EHR data, everyone talks about that. You heard some really great stuff today in a way to aggregate it and normalize it. Let's talk about EHR application layer, but a call for it to be improved, ever evolving. Maybe we need some divine intervention there. A lot of good sophisticated analytics that are ready and waiting for data to come to it. We don't need much help there. Embedding clinical trials is a whole different story, of course. That's where you introduce randomization. Those are the features and how it has to be done. We're keying on pragmatic. But then what I call the efferent loop of this is how do you get this out to individual patients? I hadn't talked about that really much at all. I'm just going to touch on that. So this is traditional observational health research. You find the cohort. This is using EHR data, either aggregated at a corporate data warehouse level or in one facility. Collect the data, clean it, analyze it, generate knowledge, publish it, and then wait for something to happen. T2 translation, you have 10 to 15 years. You can accelerate that by putting in a step where that translation should happen called decision support. I'll get to that in a minute. But the presenters today, the Valve, the Sentinel, and Odyssey, really all end at that spot, or at least they get to that spot. They don't necessarily all end there. But in my mind, before you do something, generate some knowledge, you should have the end game in mind. And if the end game is wait 15 years, then maybe you haven't really got it into the end zone yet. So a lot of folks now think about decision support with their data before they design and identify the cohort even. Where are you going to end up with this? And I think that the nice example of this is the Valve stuff we heard, where there's actually use of it. What is the risk stratification? And that really begins to put the end game on it. The next step in this would be using that knowledge, not just to publish, but to generate a prediction algorithm that's useful for individual patient. And what do you do with the results and how do you implement it? Again, with the Valve study, we talked about the risk score there, and the patient can decide based on the risk score. So this is just sort of a concept level on, I think, where most of us are currently at. Where we want to go is here, though. Providers and patients participating in clinical care, something happens, randomization, exclamation point, and then two streams follow, usual care and research. To the extent that they're one stream sharing data, it's great, but that doesn't have to be the case. But it's all have to happen by some computer somewhere and some people pushing dials and, behind the curtain, if you will. So the paradigm changes a little here. It's cohort identification to begin with, for sure, from the corporate data warehouse, let's say for ease in the VA, but then it's enroll and consent, randomize, administer an intervention and data capture. And can you do that in the EHR? Or do you do it partly in the EHR and some extra outside of EHR tools, or entirely outside of the EHR? You get the study, you analyze it, and again, you should have a decision support system waiting for you. If A is better than B, eliminate B from the formulary, for example. Now, this is very selfish because it would serve a healthcare system, maybe not generalizable, but point-of-care clinical trials, I think, follow this model, at least that's what we're trying to push. In the VA, we have 3 published examples you can look up: insulin study, diuretic comparison study, and precision oncology program. I'll not talk about them now, but suffice it to say, the problems you run into in each of those little boxes are protean and not easy to overcome, and they go from regulatory to ethical to financial to stakeholder to cultural to scientific. And you heard some of the high-level issues that the folks ran into today. This, I think, is the end game. There's only 2 slides left, 2 cartoons. This is taken from the precision oncology slide deck, but you can generalize anything. The green box and the red box, the patient well, patient sick. They move into the diagnostic box, get cancer genome sequencing done. It's put in a repository with all the prior patients who had the same thing. It's computed on, and then patients like the patient are matched, and then outcomes are really just, machine just spits them out. Here's what happened to patients treated A or B. A or B can become a randomized clinical trial at that point. That's either off-the-shelf, pre-existing by Novartis, for example, comparing patients with a particular mutation in a particular cancer site. Or A or B can be simply observed outcomes. And you can decide to wrap a clinical trial around A or B if there's clinical equipoise in your healthcare system, and in fact, conduct a clinical trial that has arrived de novo. And then, of course, the randomized outcomes go back to feed the prediction engine. And we consider that, and this is the last slide, the bottom left-hand panel, which is a local learning loop, locally selfish, I would say. The patients are represented on the bottom bar. Their data is computed on, recommendations made to providers and to the tumor board, which is the gatekeeper here, because you can't trust computed data. Someone's got to eyeball it. And then interventions administered, either randomized or not. The outside larger box is the traditional research process, which both informs the inner knowledge base and which is a recipient of knowledge from the local learning, should it be generalizable enough. And I think most of what you heard today fits in this paradigm. I just want to share it with you because it's the way that we think about things. Thank you.